Hello, good evening. Welcome to Inspire FM. This is the Ask Your Lawyer show, hosted by me, Usamah, with a special guest in the studio today. Today's a live show. To call in, the number is 01582 481822. Text WhatsApp 07779 481822. Today we'll be talking about disputes in the law, what to do when you have a dispute, how to manage those things, and how to deal with that process. We'll also be talking about our journeys into law and how that can be made into a career. Special guest today, who is a friend and also an old colleague of mine. We worked together and we kind of started our careers in law together. We worked together for a number of years. Atif Khan, welcome.
Assalamu alaikum. Thanks for having me.
No problem. Thanks for coming in. Appreciate your time. We know your time is valuable. Atif, what are you up to these days?
I'm working as a legal advisor at EasyJet currently. It's a fairly recent role that I've started. 3 months into the role now, so enjoying it, but keeps me busy.
Good. So you're doing in-house law at the moment, aren't you? You've been doing that for most of your career, right?
That's right. Yeah, it's just over 10 years now working in-house.
Wow.
Yeah, when you put it like that, it's 10 years. Makes me feel old. But,
yeah. How long has it been since we worked together? It's been about
pre-COVID.
Yeah.
Pre-COVID, isn't it? So at least 4 or 5 years, I think.
Wow. And so in terms of your roles past and present, how did you get into it? How did you wonderful some might say profession?
Yeah, some
I use
might
the term loosely.
Yeah, I think some might say people who perhaps aren't in the profession, maybe.
Yeah.
In terms of how I got into the role, I think and I know you mentioned about maybe some budding lawyers are listening. In-house roles isn't really something that you really hear about when you're studying. So it's really by accident. Graduated, was looking for a job, and saw a vacancy for an intern at a place called. And are we saying where we worked?
Yeah, we can.
Yeah, a local company, albeit global these days.
Yeah.
Called in Pelham, just up by the airport, Capability Green. So yeah, there was an advert for a legal intern. I needed any kind of legal work really. So I applied, I got the job, and I haven't looked back.
How long ago was that? What year are we talking?
2013, 2014.
We'll try not to give you age or age. Some mathematicians out there that can work it out.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
because we're not particularly good with numbers.
No.
More words, right?
Yeah. Words and letters, less so with numbers. Yeah. But yeah, around 2013, 2014. So I'd say it's been about just over 10 years for me working in-house.
And you did a law degree before that, right?
That's right, yeah. Law degree, 3 years standard law degree at University of Bedfordshire. So
local.
Another local venue.
Repping the local opportunities there. Good.
Absolutely, there's loads of opportunities locally.
Yeah. Oh, that's really good. Interesting. And so when you first started the role, you started as an intern, right?
That's right, yeah.
And how long did you do that for? What was that like? Because we often hear stories, and I think people looking at a career in law often hear, about early days in the career, doing these internships, working at local law firms, and having to essentially make tea and photocopy papers, and just do a lot of very very tedious tasks on a regular basis. So. How was it for you? What was your experience in those early days when you were sort of interning and just sort of trying to get some?
I think just to not to go too far back, but being a lawyer, that's always something I wanted to do.
Yeah.
I think from when I was 12 or 13 when we started having our sort of career days. And so
where did that inspiration come from? Was there anything in particular that sort of?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's kind of where I'm going with this. So the only exposure I had to law was.
Excuse my impatience.
Yeah, no, not at all. So the only exposure that I had with law was really TV and film, generally American shows and things like that. And all you used to see really was, you know, guys in fancy suits in the city, you know, providing justice to various individuals. And so that was the kind of initial kind of interest in law. And then obviously you kind of go into it, studied law at college, and then decided, right, I want to go and study and do my degree in law. And I was quite proactive as a student, so did various bits of work experience. So even before my internship, my paid internship, I did a lot of work experience for free. And that's predominantly high street firms, regional firms. So I suppose I kind of had half an idea of what to expect. And again, being a work experience, still being a student, so with the unpaid experiences, it is very much making the teas, doing the filing. But I've come to kind of understand that as a necessary path to kind of becoming a lawyer. And I know that's kind of probably an old school mentality, but it's almost kind of earning your way up, I suppose. Maybe that's not particularly a popular point of view.
Speaking of making tea, our host at the studio has kindly offered to make us a cup of tea. No, thank you, much appreciated. Yeah, so I think I understand what you're saying, and it is, you know, there is a skepticism about early days and having to get experience. I mean, a lot of firms and sort of employers, they do emphasize the importance of experience, you know, more so than most things in this particular sector. And I think some might argue or say that it's a necessary sort of thing you have to go through. It's part of the program. You've got to deal with it, get in there, make the tea, do your photocopying, you know, go and drop the post off and whatever your kind of stuff you're being asked to do, and that's part of the process. It's part of the learning curve.
I'd agree. I think because I think it's all about the learning, and I had to do a little bit of the admin. I think you have to take the benefits out of it. So one of the things that this little bit of admin has taught me is what's given me a better idea of is the kind of contracts that we have within the company, who we deal are. Albeit it's not the most attractive way to find that out. It's again, it's taken the positives of the task at hand. And ultimately everyone has to do their own admin, everyone has to do their own filing. As a lawyer, you know, there's certain skills that you need to have, and if you're not organized, you're probably not going to be a very successful lawyer. So I think there's an element of that as well.
Is there any particular skill set or characteristic that a person looking at a career in law would you say it's essential for them to possess? If there was one or two, what would you sort of
and again, I'm probably going to go for ones that are probably least expected, but resilience, resilience, I'd say.
I can see
because
that.
it's a really, really difficult profession. Lots of challenges every day and at every level.
And it just becomes more and more challenging, I think, in my experience.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think you have to build that resilience. There might be times where you think, I can't do this anymore. And certainly I've had those. I'm pretty sure you've had those as well.
I think we had a few of those together.
Absolutely. So I think resilience certainly one of them. And I think what goes hand in hand with resilience is hard. And I know it probably sounds a bit of a cliche, but hard work is definitely it. You can't cruise your way into a career in law.
I think I'd agree with that. You know, resilience particularly, because if you think about, you know, the amount of qualified lawyers that I'm talking about, you know, whether that's a barrister or a solicitor or a chartered legal executive, if you think of those, the number of those, I can't remember exactly, but I think you're talking 200,000 to 300,000 in total if you take all of the pathways together. You know, it's not a massive,
huge amount.
So, you know, it is a difficult industry to sort of get into. So I definitely echo your point about resilience. I think that is crucial. You have to be prepared to, you know, go the whole way. You have to be prepared to sort of stand out and put in the extra shift, you know, especially, and there's a bit of a controversial thing to say, but I think especially if you don't come from a background which is sort of accustomed to that profession. You know, for example, if you don't have family members, parents, or whatever that are from that profession, you know, if you're not from a particular demographic, shall we say?
Yeah, that's a nice way to put it.
Yeah, we have to be politically correct, don't we? So, you know, if you're not from a, you know, particular sort of, you know, demographic and whatnot, you will have, I think, just, and that's where that resilience comes in. You have to be able to sort of, you know, keep pushing, and that's the only way, and wait for your break. And if you continue, and you're hard working, like as you said, and you have to want it. I think want it enough, then you can achieve it. If I was to say, there's a particular skill set that I think is particularly useful in this profession, I'd say attention to detail.
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
we see it on every application form, and attention to detail. When you're young, you just think, what does that even mean? I think it's only when you start having to do the actual role you realize how important it is, when you're sort of nitpicking the other side's emails for spelling errors.
Absolutely. I think that's it, isn't it? Yeah.
Attention to detail is a critical one, I'd say.
Yeah. Someone else's work, or you're looking at, you know, you're supervising and you look at a junior's work, and you notice, you know, the simplest things like spelling mistakes and you know, errors in punctuation, whatever. So that's another skill. Obviously, language. I think you have to be, as we mentioned, words not numbers, right? But language skill is obviously key. But it's small things, and you might think, well, what's the big deal? But the small things can kind of make a big difference. You know, we're going to go on to talk about litigation.
Yep.
But if you're on the other side and you've had a solicitor send you a letter and it's riddled with spelling mistakes and errors, you know, all over the place, you're going to feel like you've got the upper hand.
You're going to sort of pass judgment.
Exactly.
That judgment may be misplaced, you know, however, it's still going to be passed regardless.
Yeah, well, first impressions, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So coming back to your journey then. So how was the interning experience for you? Was it really tedious and difficult?
I think there were difficulties, probably, or to say it was difficult is probably too strong, I'd say. I had a really nice manager and a good team around me, so, you know, they've made it as nice as it can be, but it was scanning, filing, photocopying, you know, to start off with. It was the menial tasks. It was making the teas and coffees. You
kind of have to earn your seat at the table.
Absolutely, right? Absolutely, yeah. It's the I forget the saying, but yeah, it's kind of the necessary path always to get there, and you know, you'll find that everywhere. I think it's not unique to my story. I think you'll find a lot of interns that have had to go through that. So,
and how did it sort of progress from there then?
Well, so I suppose technically from intern to lawyer at Impellium, obviously, and that's, you know, where you came in. Again, we can kind of discuss that a little bit later. But yeah, just kind of worked my way up, added to my experiences. Every new task I got, built my experience. And again, it was very much starting from the most basic of tasks and gradually increased in terms of difficulty, detail. So I've kind of just, I mean, like I say, that was probably 5 or 6 years of my career. So I'm trying to summarize it a little bit.
And what would you say are sort of the key differences or, you know, the factors which you think differentiate working in-house from other places like private practice, for example, for those people maybe considering a career in law, not really having heard of what, you know, not knowing and understanding what an in-house lawyer is and what kind of, you know, role that is, how that differs?
Yeah, so I think it's very different. You've got first-hand experience of the business. So I suppose what a traditional client is, that'll be your employer. So you'll have traditionally one client when you're working in-house, and I say that, and that client is your employer. So you'll see tasks from the start to the finish, whereas maybe when you're at a law firm, you'll get a query from a client and then you may never hear back. So I suppose what you don't get is exposure to what the end result was. So that's one of the things. I think being in-house and this is, and what I say is kind of taken from probably speaking to a lot of other in-house lawyers who've also worked in private practice as well, is that you get a lot of no one day is the same, I suppose. A lot of exposure to a lot of different areas, whereas maybe if you're working for a criminal law firm, you'll only be doing the criminal side of things, or you may only be doing a certain part of that. If you're working in another law firm, you may only be doing the litigation side of things. Whereas, and again, obviously, this is something that you can probably attest to as well. Is it's anything and everything that your client brings to you. Anything that doesn't necessarily fit into a box within the business, they'll probably come to legal to ask them, how should we deal with this?
I think you touched on quite a useful point, especially for anyone sort of looking at their options when it comes to a career in law. And that point is when it comes to dealing with different matters and different types of things. I think there are some practice areas where it can be quite repetitive, and some people might prefer that. I mean, for example, if you take in private practice, someone who deals with property law, conveyancing, for example, it's very routine and very sort of monotonous, shall we say. It's continuous. A person will be dealing with a very similar type of workload, very similar tasks on a regular basis. And some people like that. They like to have sort of comfort and knowledge.
Certainty in it.
Yeah, exactly. And some people might like that kind of thing. Others, they don't like. They might get bored. They might not want to be doing the same thing day in, day out. And I think an in-house role might be good for someone like that, because, as you said, you're one. That business could be, like in Pelham, a global business that has all sorts of issues, from property to disputes to contracts to employment, and you'll be sort of involved in most of those things, and your sort of experience becomes a bit more rounded.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think that's an important consideration. Someone considering a career in law should think, what do I like doing? Would I get bored doing something repetitive, or is that kind of where I want to be and what I want to do? And that should really influence a person's decision. I think in-house lawyer roles offer that opportunity for a bit more breadth and flexibility in what you're actually doing.
Yeah, and that's something that I say to, I've got young cousins who are sort of doing their exams or have done their exams or in university, and other people that you come across, other young individuals that you come across. And I've always said, if you've got an interest in law, I'd advocate to try and get as much experience as you can, because you can read about a lot of stuff, and obviously we're talking about stuff and you can take from this, but I don't think the experience of actually being there, working there, albeit even if you are just for a week, scanning files or photocopying, whatever, you get an idea of the environment, the atmosphere, and that can kind of give you an idea of whether or not you like this, or this is something or somewhere that you see yourself for the next 40, 50, 60, 50 years, depending on.
Wow. Yeah. You put it like that. It makes me think. I think a person who is maybe exploring that journey and maybe doing work experience or looking to do work experience or internships, etc., I would say that one of the most important sort of things to demonstrate, and this was something that was told to me when I did my first internship in law, that was show enthusiasm. And I never really understood what he meant by that. Only as I progressed and sort of got a few years under my belt did I start to understand what he meant by that. But it was when I was working, when I was doing my first internship, I was at first I was brought in to help with a really tedious task. It was like, I can't remember, something to do with some AML compliance stuff. It was just like really, really procedural, filling some documents in like daily. And I think they needed someone to do that, bit of help.
Yeah,
let's get an intern in. Sometimes what
some free work.
Yeah, exactly, free labor. So for me it's fine. Get a bit of exposure, something to put on the CV, something to talk about in your job interview. So I went in to do that, to help with that really specific, boring, if I'm being honest, task. For a few weeks. But after the first week, I was showing a lot of interest with different things. Getting involved in contracts and disputes, and the person who was supervising me, who was I think like the associate general counsel or something like that for the company, she would actually sort of notice that, and she would, after a while, I stopped doing that boring task, and I was sort of brought in on loads of high level stuff. But I think it's because of the consistent enthusiasm, quote unquote, that I showed, that I was very sort of pushing to get involved in different things. And by the end of it, you know, I'd a lot of different things that I worked on, a lot of experience. And it was essentially, you know, in summary, that internship is what led me to my job at Impellum, which is what led to my training contract, etc. Because the impression, you know, lasted. So showing enthusiasm, you know, even if you find the tasks boring, and being hungry, should we say, for more experience, more knowledge, I think won't go unnoticed.
Like we said at the top, it's a competitive industry. Maybe there's around 200,000 lawyers in the country, but that number sort of pales in significance really when you think about, if you just think back to your degree, and that's how I always put it, when you think about how many people were in your year group. So I think we had about 200 or 300, times that by 3 for all 3 years. So you know, you've got over nearly 1,000 students for every university in the country. It's not possible, and I don't mean this to be you know, something to demotivate anyone, but it's not possible for every single one of those to become a lawyer.
Yes, you're right.
So you need
fierce.
Absolutely. So you have to grasp the opportunities that you get, and showing enthusiasm does show the person who's giving you that experience that actually maybe you've got something about you, maybe you're worth taking a chance on, because that's what it is. Ultimately, everyone who gives you a job or experience or whatever, they're taking a chance on you.
So exactly.
I definitely agree with the showing enthusiasm. And by way of an example of not showing you enthusiasm, you know, we've had loads of over the years, we've had loads of people who've come in for work experience, generally sort of 15, 16, 17-year-olds. And you can tell the ones that actually wanted to do it versus the ones that their parents knew somebody and they asked them to get them work experience. So it's often clear. And you know, you do naturally tend to switch off with those children who it's quite clear that they're not interested in this, and you know, you'll give them the menial tasks and you won't really engage them too much. Whereas, because ultimately this is a career path that we've chosen, right? So if someone shows an interest in it, I suppose it kind of energizes us as well.
You'll feel a bit more confident in their abilities.
Absolutely. So you engage with them more, and like you say, you know, in your example, you'll get some different tasks as opposed to just the boring ones. So
I'd just like to remind the listeners that it's a live show. If you have any questions for myself or special guest Atif, you can call us on 01582 481 822, or you can text or WhatsApp 07779 481 822. That's 01582 481 822 to call, and to text 07779 481 822. So I think the key question now, if is 10 years in, it's the right choice. Loaded question.
Can I say no comment?
I don't know if our senior lawyer, Mr. Malik, is listening, but I'm sure he'd like that reference. That's a shout out for you, Atik, if you're listening. You can say no comment, but I don't know if the listeners would appreciate it.
No, I think definitely the right choice. Again, it's something that I wanted to do. It wasn't something that I felt, oh, I'm doing this for the money, you know, or for any other benefit. So the fact that it was sort of a passion of mine, I think, 10 years on, absolutely still happy with my career choice.
Good.
Yeah.
Excellent. That's very good to hear. It's a good career choice so far. We are
plenty more yet to come.
Yes. We've got a ad break coming up, so do join us for the second part of the show, where we will be talking about litigation, exciting subject of law. We will see you in the second half. Thank you very much.
This program will continue after the break. Continue listening to Inspire FM. Inspire FM.
Inspire 105.1 FM. Back to school tips on Inspire FM. Be prepared to have a new teacher and maybe a new class. You're getting older and closer to the end of school, so your class will change so that it is more catered to you. Just enter with a smile and with a positive attitude to learning. Tune in to Inspire FM for more back to school tips.
Enjoy quality and tasty 100% authentic halal Chinese and Thai food from Gao Express, brought to you by the team behind Top's Pizza in Luton. Choose from all your delicious Chinese and Thai favourites. Then order for delivery or collection from Gao Express in Wellington Street, Luton, Marketplace, Stevenage, and now also on Nightingale Road in Hitchin. Open daily midday till late. Find the number or order online at Gao, that's GAO, express.co.uk, or like Gao Express on Facebook.
Had an accident, a bump, trip or fall? Then you need Claims Specialists, your first choice for accident claims. The Specialist Claims Company on Dunstable Road in Luton. With excellent access to expert solicitors and on a no-win, no-fee basis, Claims Specialists use their 30 years experience to help get you the best compensation possible. For injuries at work, taxi, PCO and private hire incidents, road accidents and vehicle damage, medical negligence, plus rented housing disrepair. In short, when you need to make any claim, click on claimspecialists.co.uk or call 01582 733 222.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ألم تر كيف فيل ألم يجعل كيدهم في تضليل وأرسل عليهم طيرا أبابيل ترميه حجارة من سجيل جعلها
Street LU1 2EP, and not just for the best grass-fed and dry-hung aged flower sides, salads and vegetarian options, with mouth-watering mocktails too. All this and with excellent service. View the menu, book your table or even party or celebration event at or call 01582 750 213.
अस्सलाम वालेकुम, मेरा नाम किरण है। कोट कश्मीर ऑर्फन रिलीफ ट्रस्ट मेरा एक खूबसूरत घर है जहां मेरे साथ सैकड़ों यतीम और बेसहारा बच्चों की तालीम, तरबियत और पुरसुकून माहौल में परवरिश हो रही है, और ये सब कुछ आपके तावन से मुमकिन है। अल्लाह से दुआ है कि अल्लाह करीम आपको सदा सलामत रखे, और उम्मीद है कि आप इसी तरह अपना प्यार, मोहब्बत और तावन जारी रखेंगे। कोट UK ऑफिस 0300123774 court.org.uk।
Are you thinking of starting a podcast or looking to give your podcast a new home? Why not hire Inspire FM's dedicated recording studio? With rates starting at just £25 per booking, our podcast studio is a fully functional, acoustically treated space for up to 4 people, and it's set up and ready to use as soon as you arrive. For more information or to inquire about booking, email us at info@inspirefm.org or send us a DM on our social media accounts at Inspire FM Luton.
Good evening, listeners. Welcome back to Inspire FM. You are tuned into the Ask Your Lawyer show with your host today, Usamah, and we have in the guest, Atif. Today, we've been talking about a career in law, Atif's journey into law, and life as an in-house lawyer. In the second part of the show, we will talk a little bit about the actual law itself, and today's subject will be litigation, which is a form of resolving disputes. Atif, thanks for coming in. I just want to say, as a disclaimer, the content of this show doesn't amount to legal advice, and everyone's situation is specific. So if you have a particular query, then you should seek legal advice, and the information in this show is general purposes only. And with that, let's talk about litigation.
Let's do it. Yeah.
So what do we understand that term to mean, Atif? from the perspective of our listeners who aren't probably legally trained.
No, and I think that's the point that I really wanted to start on, because I think you hear a lot of lawyers talk about litigation, and I think if you haven't studied law, that term might go over your head. And this is not to be patronising, but it's a very, very specific term, a very specialist term, I suppose, within the legal sector. But effectively, litigation is, just as you mentioned at the top of the section there, it is a form of resolving disputes. And when you talk about litigation, you are talking about claims. That all kind of comes within it. So it's going to court. It's it's various methods of resolving a dispute effectively, I think, to summarize it.
The term gets, I think, thrown around quite loosely.
Yeah.
So I think the first thing is to understand what it means, and it's essentially a method of resolving a dispute by using the courts. There are many ways to resolve a dispute. You could get a third party involved to try and sort it out. You could informally have a chat. There are many different ways to resolve a dispute. There are formal ways, like mediation or arbitration, and there is the most sort of well-known way, which gets thrown around a lot, litigation, which is where you ask the courts to resolve a dispute. You get the courts to involve themselves in your dispute to come to a resolution. There's a difference, I think, that should be noted here between criminal and civil litigation. Criminal, obviously, relating to criminal offences, and civil litigation is other than that, essentially. Normally, when it's to do with money, should we say, or negligence or something like that. So those two areas are distinct. I think the focus point for this show will be civil litigation. We don't do criminal litigation. Unfortunately, it's always something I was interested in, but never really got into. It's exciting, I think, depending on the sort of level of cases that you do, and it's dramatized quite a lot on TV shows and stuff, isn't it?
Absolutely. I think, most TV shows about the law are predominantly focused around the criminal side of things. Much like you, it was something I was always very interested in. The criminal law module during my degree was always the most fun. But I think that is always, I think it's certainly for me, and this is very much a personal choice. I was always a little bit cautious as to, I guess, potentially the people I'd have to maybe represent, which at the time I think, was something that stopped me. But actually, I think
it's a very, very common subject of discussion for that area.
Absolutely,
isn't it?
Yeah. But like I say, it's not disparaging at all to anyone who is in that sector, and I think it's an important part. It's an important role to play, because I think whilst I was always focused on, maybe I don't want to represent a certain type of person, I think the main perspective rights, really.
Yeah. Everyone has the right to a fair trial, don't they?
Absolutely.
And
it's a human right.
Yeah, exactly. Interesting. But we don't want to digress too much with criminal law. We leave that to our criminal law colleagues, which there are plenty of in this town. So, litigation. It gets thrown around because I think a lot of the time, whether it's business, whether it's personal, people have disputes, normally around money. Let's be frank, that is oftentimes what these issues come down to. And people loosely throw the term, I'm going to take you to court. I'll take you to court.
Yeah.
We hear it, don't
well,
we?
see you in court.
See you in court, yeah. Very dramatic way to deal with it. And but I think the reality is that statement is very weighty. And most of the time, people don't actually appreciate what that involves. Taking someone to court can be quite a daunting, costly, and stressful experience, I'd say. And in my own sort of professional experience, I've had it many times where clients are very, very eager to issue a claim, to take a matter to court, to litigate over it. And, we try very hard to explain to them what it entails, what it's, and I almost guarantee them that a few months in, normally around disclosure stage or witness evidence, they will sort of really question their choice, because, it's not always about the strength of your case. It's not even always about, a lot of the time people want to sort of take it to court over principle, which is nothing wrong with that, I'd say. But we should really give consideration to the pros and the cons, the risks, the effort that's got to be exerted. I mean, the lawyers don't necessarily mind because it's sort of billable, isn't it? It's keeps them in a job.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. Us, I should say, not them. Distancing myself from the profession there. Keeps us in a job. But I think ultimately people should be really cautious about that, because it often takes a lot more stress, time, and effort than people initially anticipate.
Yeah, and I think speaking from that in-house perspective from businesses' perspective, whether that's a dispute between two businesses or a dispute between a business as in an employer-employee, or just an individual on their own against a business. Cost is a massive consideration, and generally speaking, the aim is to avoid going to court altogether and trying to resolve the situation without the need for a day in court.
And that's actually a point I think that is also attracts a lot of misconception. Most cases, the vast majority of cases, don't actually make it to trial. The vast majority of cases will be settled outside of court. And I think that kind of gives a good indication as to why, what goes into it, how much time, effort, etc. goes into it. That a lot of the time settlement is normally reached before it gets in front of a judge and a trial is heard. So that's a common misconception. Just because you issue a claim doesn't necessarily mean that claim will reach a judge and be heard by a judge. More often than not, it won't be.
No, and I think when we're talking about the courts, their main job is to resolve the dispute in the most efficient way that they can in court, or without having to come to court, would be that before coming to court, you've done everything in your power to try and resolve it.
Yeah, and I think that brings us nicely onto sort of the pre-action protocols, right? The actions that parties to a dispute are expected to take before they actually commence proceedings, before they actually take the matter to court. The rules, the civil procedural rules, which are the rules that govern litigation in the UK, they state that parties who want to issue a claim have to follow a certain protocol beforehand. They have to try to narrow the issues. They have to try to give sort of effort to resolving it and settling it without issuing a claim. And that's something the courts will actually expect. And if people don't do that and they sort of, issue a claim without following that, then that's something they can be penalized for by the courts, whether it's to do with costs or different types of things. The courts have different ways to punish people for not following the rules. But I think the lesson for that is, if anybody has a dispute, to do with money or whatever it is, normally it's money, whether it's business to business, person to person, person to business, whatever that sort of party relationship is, it's always best to try to solve it initially outside of court. And even if you do instruct lawyers to deal with it for you, those lawyers will be normally bound to follow the protocols, and that means they'll have to set out in writing clearly, and even if you're doing it yourself, if you're representing yourself, if you're a litigant in person, you'd still be to an extent expected to follow these rules. You'd have to set out your claim. What is it you're claiming? What's the issue? What's the amount that you're claiming? How have you calculated it? For example, is it a breach of contract? I mean, the last show that I did, we talked about contracts. Whether it's two businesses entering into an agreement, they'll have a written contract, or they should do anyway. A lot of
not always the case.
No, not always. No, not always. And I think this is why this highlights the importance of having a written agreement, because that will be the first port of call for any parties disputing something. Do you have a contract, and what does it say?
Yeah, and I appreciate this is the litigation section rather than the contract section, which you've already done. But certainly my advice always, as a lawyer to my clients, is put it in writing. The whole purpose, and people get afraid of contracts and things in writing, but the whole purpose of a contract is to make things easier in the event that something goes wrong. That way, it's clear what each party's obligations were.
Yeah, exactly. And it makes resolving a lot easier because you've got something to rely on, something to refer back to, something which shows this is what was agreed. This is your obligation. You haven't met your obligation, and as such, you owe me whatever amount of money, for example. So the importance of having things in writing, having a proper agreement can't be stressed. And a lot of the time, people realize that when they're involved in a dispute, right? I'm sure you've experienced that as well. They think, oh, it's all going to be okay. We're never going to fall out. We're friends, we're family, known each other, whatever. We've done business before. When I hear that, it just goes in one ear out the other for me, unfortunately. So I'm so accustomed to it going wrong for people.
I think that's the trouble with hindsight, though, isn't it? And I think when you're in that situation, there's always that, oh, if only I had done this or done that.
But I think people will often rely on their personal relationships and the assurances that people will give in the course of business, and they'll think that that's sufficient. And I think most of the time, people don't expect there to be problems or things to go wrong.
No.
That's a fair expectation. You know someone, you think you know someone, but if that were the case, then I wouldn't be so busy with work. so that's the reality is a lot of the time, maybe not all the time, but a lot of the time it does go wrong. And when that does happen, I can assure you, you will be wishing that you had put it in writing.
Yeah, and I think that was a little bit of an evil chuckle from the both of us there. But I don't mean it to be that, I think. And like I say, I think
that's open to interpretation.
Yeah. But I think, like I say, I think my advice is always, and I'm sure yours is the same, whenever you're speaking to your clients, is let's put it in writing, because that will avoid the awkward situations at the other end. So certainly from our perspective, it'd be much easier for us if things were in writing. We don't hope for these kind of situations to arise. And certainly if you take the advice of a good lawyer, you won't have this trouble.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that sort of agreement that you put together, that written contract that you have, whether it's properly formal or it isn't, that's going to be what's relied on initially for any dispute. That's what's going to be put in front of the judge. Well, this is what the parties get. And if you don't have that, then it's a case of he said, she said. My understanding of the agreement was this, and mine was that. Well, you completely understood two different things. Judge's job becomes a lot harder now. The lawyer's job becomes a lot harder. The work becomes a lot more, and the costs go up.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, again, in terms of expectations, because again, people are potentially quite emotive when making a claim or wanting to go to court. And I think just to kind of clarify, not everyone necessarily gets their day in court. It's not like you see on the TV where, you're standing in front of the judge and you're slamming your hands on the desks or things like that. Quite often the judge will decide the case in absence of the claimant or defendant, so the person making the claim and the person who they're claiming against. So, it's not a case of you go there and you'll be able to, give your point of view. Quite often the judge, and again, just because there's very few judges, there's a massive backlog, and a judge will often take things away, look at the evidence that you're speaking of, whether it's the contract or the email or whatever it is, and they'll make a decision, and then they'll just send you a letter letting you know whether they've decided for or against you. So
there's a judgment.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you touched on actually another really important misconception, and I like the example of slamming your folder on the desk in front of the judge, and we see it on TV, but if that was done in an English courtroom,
I'd probably get thrown out, wouldn't you? Yeah, the judge wouldn't be too happy.
I don't think you'd see that as useful for your case.
No.
And I think these sort of overly dramatized shows are, they're entertainment, but they don't really do the profession justice at all, do they?
And I think that's the thing. I think that the amount of times somebody's asked me about the show Suits, and is it really like that?
Yeah.
There is an expectation. People see things on the TV and they think, oh, maybe that's what being a lawyer is really like.
Yeah. Unfortunately, there's a lot more paperwork than that, and you don't just get to go in front of the judge and speak your heart. You'll be waiting probably about 18 months for a hearing date. And in between that time, there's a serious amount of paperwork to do. I think it might be useful to touch on the litigation process, actually, so listeners have an idea of what's involved if you're contemplating litigating a case. Someone owes you some money, business deal has gone wrong. Well, of course, you can reach out to me, and I'd be happy to advise you on that.
Little plug there.
Yeah, well, naturally. So people have to.
I'd recommend him.
Oh,
for
thank
anyone
you.
listening.
Very kind, very kind. So I didn't pay him to do that, by the way. Just for the avoidance of doubt.
Yeah, no, I can confirm. No payment came my way.
So in terms of the process of litigation, it's a lengthy process, and it's quite a complicated process, and there are rules that govern the whole process. As I mentioned before, those are set out in the civil procedural rules, and they set out how to go about litigating a case in the English courts. Now, as we spoke about earlier, you've got to follow the pre-action protocols, which basically, in essence, say that you have to try to narrow the issues in dispute, try to solve it beforehand. That involves putting in writing what your issues are, what your sort of general evidence, what are you relying on, what's the issue, what's the amount of payment owed or outstanding, if that's what the issue is about, normally is, and how did you calculate? It's a really crucial point. It's not enough for you to just say, well, I think that this is the case, or this is what I agreed. Well, how did you agree that? Does the evidence support it? Is there a contract? Is there, a history of trading? Is there communications that can support your arguments and what you're saying? And these are the things that you really need to think about and consider. Do I have sufficient evidence to back up what I'm saying? So you'll, put your issues and your concerns and your points into a letter, normally in writing. You'll send that to the other party, and if both parties are represented by lawyers, and the lawyers will do this between themselves, and normally they'll be familiar with the process. And then what often happens is they'll be back and forth a few times, and that will sort of ideally hopefully narrow down the issues, and you get to the point of, okay, well, this is what it is, this is what's owed, or this is how it's calculated. And if there was anything potential or argued or not clear, then those things could kind of be narrowed down to what the crux of the dispute is. And
they become clear as well, because there might be something on the other side as to maybe why you didn't receive the payment. And so there might be something.
Exactly. They'll have an opportunity to
absolutely
to explain themselves, or to put in any counter arguments, or whatever they consider the case to be. So everyone will have an opportunity to put their point of view across. And if no resolution is reached by that time, then normally the next port of call is to issue a claim with the courts to start the litigation process. But often there are sort of alternative resolution options available, like mediation, where you get a third party to come in and sort of try to come to a resolution. That can be done formally, where you get a professional mediator as a third party to try to settle the matter between the parties. They'll come in sort of impartial, speak to both sides, and try to agree a compromise, a deal, so the parties can walk away sort of and the matter's settled. And
there can be a cost to that as well.
Yeah, there'll be a cost to that if you do it formally. I mean, mediation can be you just get someone that knows both parties,
particularly if we're talking about two friends, who went into business, and then something
the uncle down the road to come in and sit down,
or the imam maybe from the mosque.
The imam from the mosque. Many different options. Someone that knows both parties, that can sort of be fair and not take a side, and be sort of reasonable in their approach. That person can try to sort of mediate. But if all else fails, then you want to look at issuing a claim, and that normally is a process that rules apply to. You have to complete an N1 claim form. It's the form that's available readily on the internet, and a lot of this comes down to the value of your claim. So the way the English courts work is they have different tracks, and those tracks are generally based on the value / complexity of the case. So if, for example, it's a relatively modest amount in question, then you have the small claims track. I think it's up to £5,000 or £10,000, something like that.
Mm.
Can't remember exactly off the top of my head. So you have the small claims track for sort of modest amounts of debt or claims, and that generally a person can navigate themselves through that process. And most of the time, I don't think the courts will expect a person to be legally represented when it comes to a small claim. That's why they have these money claim online. You know, there's a website, it's a portal run by the UK, the English courts legal system, MCOL we call it, money claims online. Person can go on there, set up an account, and they can manage their case through there. And it's fairly simple, straightforward process that, you know, a litigant in person could quite comfortably, I think, navigate through. You'll have to complete the claim form, and you have to set out exactly the amount you're claiming. And another point to note is the court system isn't free. You know, you've got to pay a court fee for your case, so you have to really consider, you know, what your claim is valued at and the amount of time and effort and cost you're going to incur.
And I think this was one of the things that we talked about at the start of this section was you know, the considerations and costs being a consideration, because, you know, depending on what your claim is, or what your claim is worth, you know, you'll have to pay a fee that's based on that, and the fee that you pay the courts to submit your claim is based on how much you're claiming. So at that point, you have to decide whether or not it's worth it. So, you know, if it's for example, you know, you're chasing for someone to pay you £100, well, then maybe it's not worth you making that claim, for example. I'm not saying that it's not worth it, but you know, that's something that you have to consider. Something should be considered, because there's the fee, and then to submit the claim, which I think the lowest fee is maybe £20-25, something like that. And then if it does get to a time when a hearing is arranged, you also then have to pay a hearing fee. So, you know, you're sort of eating into what you're claiming.
Exactly. So I think costs is something something really important to consider when you're thinking about making a claim. And there are different fees that depend on the type of claim that you're issuing. And we're talking about money claims here. There are different fees that apply for different types of claims, but we're talking specifically, which is probably the most common one, in my experience anyway, is money claims, and that depends on the value of the claim. Yeah, and you can find that information sort of readily available on the Gov.uk website. But, you know, depending on the value, the most important thing to note really is if your claim is above £10,000, then it's a percentage of the value of the claim. Yeah, so anything between £10,000 and £200,000, the court fee for that is 5% of the value of the claim. Yeah. So if you're claiming £25,000, then your court fee will be 5% of that, which is maths £1,250, right? £1,250. Yeah. Don't quote
so not cheap. So it's, you know, it's an investment just to make the claim.
Yeah,
at that stage. So,
but it's important to note that claim fee, the court fee, will be added to your claim. Yeah. So it will be something which is recoverable in the event that you succeed. But, you know, to recover your money owed, allegedly, we should say, it will depend on the case at hand. And you have to really consider, is it worth me pursuing this? Am I likely to recover my money?
And then just to add, even if you are successful in court, then there's potential other costs in enforcing that judgment, because the courts will give you the judgment, but then they're not going to be the ones to collect that payment. So you may then have to get bailiffs involved and whatever else. So.
Exactly. So the process, I think, to summarize, is a long one. It's a lengthy one, but it can be very effective if a person is looking to sort of recover a debt, or there's a breach of contract or something like that. You know, it's a useful way to actually get your money back, really. A lot of the time, if your claim is against the company, once you issue a court case, they will take you seriously. And with that, we're coming to the end of the show. So thank you very much for listening. Thank you for joining, Atif. Take care, listeners. Assalamu alaikum.